Hello. Well, we are here and we were just saying that this is the first pancake of this podcast. It might be misshapen and funny looking and a little bit awkward, but we're gonna just jump in.
As long as you're not calling me misshapen and funny looking, I'm good.
We're good. We're good.
And all pancakes are good pancakes
I
in our
agree.
house are
Yes.
worthy. So I love it.
Same.
Yeah.
So this is the newest season of The Art of Sway, and I have a new co-host here with me named Casey Benedict. And so we
Yay.
thought we would start things off. I would love to tell the story of how I met Casey and then give her a chance to introduce herself a little bit, and then we'll jump into everything. But we didn't want to jump in without a proper intro. That felt a little bit rude. So
We'll save being rude for later.
Right.
Warm people up.
So I met Casey. It was last summer, so 2023, and we were both heading to the ANA social media and digital conference, something like that. It's a mouthful.
Yep.
And it was held that summer in Carlsbad outside of San Diego. And one of the cool things about ANA conferences, and Casey and I have talked about this before, is they have a pretty cool app. Well, I have some issues with the app, but what I do like about the app is that you have this list of everyone who's attending, and you can like indicate, almost a little bit like a dating app. You can indicate your interest in someone, you can chat back and forth, you can set up meetings, and it's a great way to kind of feel like you're going into the conference knowing who you want to connect with and who you want to meet.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm understanding what happened correctly, you and someone on your team were going through the list, identified me as someone you were dying to meet, because of course, reached out to me. You even went outside the app, because that's how hardcore you are. You reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I clicked through to see who you were, and I was like, that's weird. She kind of does the same thing that I do. Why is she reaching out? But then I saw that you went to Michigan, and as a rabid Michigan mom, that was like an instant, she's okay in my book.
That's great.
And so I responded, and we said we would say hi there. And then I'm sitting on the airplane. I think we hadn't even taken off yet, or maybe we had just taken off. And I get this message on LinkedIn from you that we're on the same flight. You think we're on the same flight. Do we want to share an Uber?
Right.
And we ended up, I had rented a car, so I ended up driving you to the hotel, and we had dinner that first night, and we got along great despite doing the same thing.
Yes. Can I add a little bit to this?
Yes.
Because I just want to come clean. So Danielle, I've known about you since the earliest days of my agency. You were in food. We were in food. You were agency side. We worked with agencies, and literally, I was like fangirling you, but also, oh, you're my competitor. So for forever, you were my competitor. And when that conference came up, you were a speaker.
Yeah.
And my team had a protocol before I traveled to any conference to reach out to the speakers, and then the attendee list after that, but definitely the speakers, because they were notable. And so my team got to the list before I did. And I was like, oh, but I didn't mean Danielle. Like, I was so worried that as a competitor, I was reaching out to you. Like, I thought it was kind of a misstep as well. But then your response was so lovely. I was like, okay, settle down. Like, maybe this is awesome. And the funny thing about being on your flight is I don't live in Michigan.
Right.
But I was visiting family in Michigan and flying from Detroit to the event, and literally stood in line right behind you to get on the plane. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's Danielle. And we'd never met in person.
Nope.
So from the same, airplane, part of the airplane, I was LinkedIn messaging you, and you got back to me, and the rest is history, because as your first message indicated, you're lovely, and it was so much fun to get to know you, and here we are. But I had to come clean that at first I was like, my like heart was in my throat, like, oh my gosh, we just reached out to a competitor that I've been watching for 14 years or 12 years, and how is this going to go? And it's been great.
It's been
so much fun. Yeah.
I think we all I want to give you a chance to properly introduce yourself and your company and what you do, but we all do that. I mean, when you're running a company, you have team members helping you with things and you delegate out. The same thing happened to us last week. I send out cold emails to
Yep.
people, and I have someone on my team help me put the list together, and she'll take a stab at the list, and then I go through and I remove anyone who I know. Well, I
Mm.
had accidentally left on an agency that not only do I know, I worked there for 6 years. I had both of my kids when I worked there, like would consider some of these people family. And this
Yes.
email went out from me saying, I'd love to introduce myself to you.
I think that's great, actually.
So it
Yes,
happens.
it does
Have
happen.
you forgotten about me?
Right. I I think it just keeps us humble,
Yep.
right? It keeps
Yep.
us oh, I so feel that. So, yeah, that's great.
So, okay. So why don't you give your little elevator speech of who you are and what you do, and then we can jump
Sure.
into it.
Absolutely. So, I am the CEO and founder of Maverick Mindshare. Maverick Mindshare actually started under a different name. We were Kitchen Play until 2021. So food and beverage focused, but in that time we found an influencer marketing agency, and we found so many um, projects took us into different verticals like parenting and wellness,
Mhm.
travel, you name it. And one of our clients said to us, I want to pitch you internally to other departments, but Kitchen Play is not really representative of what you're doing for us.
Right.
So we rebranded in 2021 to Maverick Mindshare, and we are influencer marketing, like very, very clearly. We don't do social, we don't do paid digital. We will bring those things in, but much like you guys, we love influencer marketing, and that's our wheelhouse and where we want to play 100% of the time if we can. So
Yeah. And you are based in the Philly area.
I am,
Yeah.
but my team's all over.
Right. Same with
Yeah.
us.
So yes, so not in Michigan anymore, outside of Philly, which is fun, great area to be, central to kind of a lot of the places that we travel in our ANA conferences and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I've been here. I always base it on my oldest daughter's age because we bought our house right before she was born. So 21 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
time
then
flies.
I want to give you a minute to talk about the conference that you're holding in the spring because
Okay.
I'm excited to be
Awesome.
there.
Awesome. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah. So I met Danielle, I met you going on this journey of conference attendance over 2 years' time. So I went to a ton of ANA. I did a Ad Week, Creator Economy Live, just all kinds of things, and other things that weren't influencer related, like the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, which is also called WeBank,
Yeah.
um, Fancy Food Show, Expo East, all that. So in those 2 years, I really saw that the industry, the marketing conference industry, is missing something, both for influencer marketers specifically, because most conferences are marketing focused with a track on influencer. Um, but beyond that, I was meeting with brands and agencies, but mostly the brands were saying, I really just want to know what other brands are doing. Like, I want to know how they're scaling, or when they're at scale, how they're maintaining the volume, or how they're measuring what tech stack they have. And so, in conversations with a lot of different brand folks, I decided to come up with a conference, an influencer innovation event next Chicago, March 31st and April 1st in Chicago, that is different than any other conference out there. So rather than one-way learning and sitting and listening to case studies and showcases, it's roll up your sleeves and let's all talk about what are the issues, challenges, solutions we're looking for in the influencer world for our own strategies, for our teams, and both executive level brand influencer marketing folks and agency folks are welcome. There's peer advisory groups for 4 different levels of professionals in terms of where you are with influencer marketing. So very excited about it. It's going to be unlike anything else and really needed. And the other piece is leadership development. Like we're talking, and I don't want to get us in a rabbit hole, but we're seeing talk about how the CMO role is now coming from social, or should be coming from the social side of marketing.
Yeah.
Where's the leadership pipeline and development and training and nurturing and support for those executives who are coming up on the social media side? This conference will address that as well, give a place for those executives to really dig into the art and the science of influencer marketing as a part of the entire mix of marketing. So thank you for that. That's my
Yeah.
more
Well, I'm
than
excited.
1 minute spiel.
I'm excited to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, I'm thrilled that you're coming. Again, that was one of those decisions of, do I open this whole thing up to my competitors or to other agencies? And I was like, yeah, because we need a space to talk to each other and to refine best practices and get not just a finger on the pulse. My tagline is, this is where you come to create the curve, not just stay ahead of it. So I want folks like you in there sharing, your 15 years in the business or beyond, because, that might be your agency lifespan, but you've had those 6 years with the agency that doesn't remember you. So I don't want to
Right.
forget that. So yeah, I think it's just going to be such a lovely petri dish. Might not be the most attractive way of saying it, but just for ideas, innovation,
Yeah.
collaboration,
Well, and it's
validating.
not so many of these, to your point, influencer marketing is either a track at a marketing conference or
Right.
it's a giant trade show.
Yes.
And I think we'd be hard pressed to find anyone who finds that an ideal environment for learning and networking.
Right. Yeah. Networking is the coffee breaks in between the sessions, if you're lucky. Or I had somebody say about the app at some of these events that it is like a dating app. And all of a sudden you've matched with somebody and they send you on a wild goose chase to meet with them behind a planter in Banquet
Right.
Hall C. And there's nobody in Banquet Hall C. And you're like, what am I doing here? So it's not even as effective, even, when you've got technology and the intent behind it. It's a toss up sometimes if you meet the right people or have the right conversations,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. So switching gears, I thought that it would be, or we thought that it would be interesting to start each episode with something that's kind of going on currently and talk it through. And the obvious thing that came to my mind, you and I are both living in battleground states, so the election is
Yes.
impossible to avoid.
Yes.
It kind of losing our minds.
Right.
But
I think we have fewer than 20 days, right? I think
yes, thank
it's almost
goodness.
over. We're in the home stretch.
One of the things that I was saying to you that is so crazy to me is that we both have parents in their 80s. And if you had said to me, like on my bingo card or whatever the saying is, like having my mom know about Call Her Daddy and Charlemagne the God would not be on my bingo card for 2024. But it just
Right.
kind of, the fact that Kamala was on both of those podcasts. I know Trump has been on some podcasts as well that are not as much on my radar. So forgive me for not knowing the names of them.
Right.
But then having influencers at the national conventions, just the fact that there was a creator summit at the White House. I
Yes.
mean, I think we've really kind of entered this new era of the importance of influencers, in not just in influencing, the mascara that we're buying next week, but the decisions that we're making at the polls.
Right.
It's a very, very different world now than it was even 2 years ago or 4 years ago at the last big elections. And so to me, that's the biggest thing of this
Yeah.
week is these influencers taking center stage in a presidential election.
Yeah. I have to tell you, when the convention happened and the Democratic convention happened and they invited a whole slew of influencers, treated them very much like press, I want to say, from the reports.
Yeah.
And traditional media journalists were really put out about that, from what I could read. And to me, that actually has it like such roots in where influencers started, because you may remember back in the day, the impetus to launch my agency was sitting in a blogger, right? It wasn't
Right. It was just
influencer, a
blogs.
blogger conference. And the PR reps and the brand reps wanted to treat the influencers, bloggers, like media, like journalists. And it was a big disconnect. And I'm so fascinated to fast forward 15 years and say, we're still having some kind of friction between what is an influencer, what is a journalist, do they belong on the same playing field, do they not? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's, I mean, so many thoughts. I mean, the same thing kind of happened to me back in the day. And I think there are different types of influencers, and some of them do fall more into the journalism camp, and then
Mhm,
others fall more into the spokesperson camp.
mhm,
And that to me was the big confusion and that I saw causing so many issues back 13, 15 years ago is
mhm,
that, I was working at Edelman and we'd get this list of mom bloggers and we would just send them all product with the expectation that they would review that product and write
mhm.
about it like they were journalists. But the
Right,
big difference there is if a journalist is receiving something to review, they're being paid by the publication. So it's
right.
part of their job that they're getting compensated for. And the
Yep.
bloggers weren't getting paid anything for this. And then all of a sudden they have this like room of their house filled with
Mhm,
crap from
mhm.
every single company out there who wants to reach them.
Right.
And there's no incentive for them to spend time doing that. And
Yeah.
then there was also this kind of the brands for some reason seem to hold influencers to a different, even though they were treating the influencers like journalists, they were holding them to a different standard and wanted to ensure that certain key messaging got put into the posts and that things were
Right.
spelled correctly or
And
the
God forbid, negative. You couldn't,
right, you
like,
couldn't.
actually post an editor I guess editorial or like a neutral review of something. It had to be
Correct.
positive.
Right. And so that's where, to me, that's where it kind of started flipping like, no, PR firms, you don't want to work with influencers as journalists. You want to work with them as spokespeople and
Mhm.
hire them and pay them a fee. And then you have way more control
Right.
over what's being said. I
Yeah.
think taking it back to the political realm, it's interesting because you once again still have this issue that they're not being paid by a publication. I think the difference now that makes it more possible is that there's at least revenue to be made. So if you have a large
Mhm.
TikTok, you're making money. If you have a huge YouTube following, you're making
You mean
money.
outside of a sponsored
Right, right. So you
relationship?
can support yourself as an independent journalist who
Right.
is an influencer in a way that wasn't possible 15 years ago. So I
Right.
think yes, we're having that same there's still that same kind of like clash between the traditional journalists and the new school influencer type
Right.
journalists. But I think the influencer journalists are in a much better position now to play that role.
Yeah. And then the other question I have is around, is it a good idea for influencers who aren't typically politically vocal to become politically vocal, whether during a presidential election cycle or when war breaks out or when some other issue that's near and dear to them pops up? Because I haven't followed a lot of the influencers who were invited to the convention or who may be covering the political landscape, because I don't those aren't the people that I'm reading and following on a
Right.
regular basis anyway. But I'm guessing they've got a political vein to their work. So,
I
where
think
does it fall with people who don't have that political vein to their work? Are they going to turn off brand deals if they get too political?
I think it's very tricky. We have a lot of clients who don't not only do not want to work with influencers who have posted anything about conflict, war, politics,
Hmm.
anything like that, but also don't want to work with any influencers who post about social justice issues, which to me
Wow.
is taking it like a really big step
Right.
farther than
Right.
that. And I think I have a lot to, I think there's still a lot of fear and trepidation in the space, still stemming from the Bud Light Dylan Mulvaney
Sure.
issue
Yes.
of I never know what noun to call that
Debacle?
cluster.
Cluster.
Cluster
That's
blank.
yeah, that's a half of a noun.
Um,
Right.
that caused huge ripple effects in the influencer marketing industry that I think we're still seeing today. And there's this big
Agreed.
fear about aligning yourself with someone who is known for having a strong opinion or is known for a certain issue or
Right.
way of life.
Yeah.
Um,
And in that case, I don't even know that she had a strong opinion. It was just what it represented,
right.
the progressive attitude toward working with her. And again, how much time do we have? Because I think there's so much to unpack there, and we're probably not going to solve it.
Yeah.
But you're right. I agree that we still see the ripple. I think in the early part of this year, maybe I was tracking how many brands were running into similar, like I'm going to get it wrong, but the Ozempic house or um, it probably
Oh,
wasn't called that, but the Weight Watchers
the Weight Watchers
house,
house. I don't remember what it
house.
was called.
Yeah. And there was, again, a little bit of, not that any of the messaging was wrong or the influencers were the wrong choice. There was just something about it that didn't, like, maybe one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. And
Yeah.
so it became the wrong message through the wrong people by no fault of, let me stop there. But I remember that one. And there were a couple of others
Yeah.
that came up pretty early in the year. So,
I think I'm seeing a little bit of a shift. I think even as late as the summer, I was still seeing a lot of clients saying no one with anything political whatsoever, just
mhm,
no, hard no, not a thing for
right,
us. I was seeing some conversations on LinkedIn the other day, and I don't know if this is going to carry through, but talking about like it's kind of impossible to avoid it right now in
mm,
this very heated election season. So the recommendation is to just kind of limit the talk of it, you know, one day before, one day after the sponsored content, or 2 days
okay,
before, 2 days after, which feels a lot more reasonable and comfortable to me. I
right,
hate the thought that only people who are, willing to not speak up at all about issues that are important to them and not use their platform for helping to
right,
push forward issues that they're passionate about. That's so sad to me that only people who are not doing that will be able to get
right,
sponsored content.
right. I think you're right. That seems more reasonable. And it brings up the interesting point of the dynamic in influencer marketing right now, which is there used to be a time when we were working with bloggers, it was long form content. And then the social media channels were activated in support of driving eyeballs back to that long form content.
Yeah.
Now it's completely flipped. I think long form is coming back, but topic for another day. But everything is social and very, it disappears quickly. Like it's moving through. So does it need to be longer than a day on the front and a day on the back end? Because content is just moving at the speed of creation. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Whereas if it were a blog post, I think people would, be looking at how long that sort of lasts in the ether. It has a lot more sticking power.
Yeah, I think we had this with a client just last month. We had an influencer that we're going to be using. I think I told you the story that we're going to be using for an initiative in a couple of months. And there was he had something in his reels that I thought was hysterical, but was potentially very upsetting
Right.
to the folks who work at this client.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had a conversation with the client and I said, "Oh, well, was it in his story? Like, are you okay if he just agrees not to do anything like that moving forward?" And we just kind of like move past it. And she said, "No, Danielle, it's in his reels. Like it's there." And
I know the backstory. I'm not
yeah,
going to tell, but it's a funny one.
it
Yeah.
involved a small penis contest. So I'll say.
There we go.
It was very funny. It is not appropriate for most clients. But
Right.
the converse, I think you're right. If it's something that is searchable and findable and lives there forever, I think that is a much bigger issue than something that's living in stories or,
Yeah.
but
And just
even like
galloping through.
we don't do anything anymore on Twitter, but even there, it's short form and it moves past quickly, but you can still search it.
Right.
and find it. Like, I really feel like stories are the only really ephemeral one.
Right. And unless we're talking about Snap, which I don't know how many brands yet are getting it, and it wouldn't be the Snapchat that disappears anyway if you're
Right.
working with an influencer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I back in the spring of this year, I saw, because I live close to Wilmington, Delaware. So I saw a job posting for the director of partnerships for the Biden campaign, which is obviously no longer in existence. But it occurred to me as I was thinking through how they would activate influencers that they really need to find people who are already, their bread and butter is politics
Yeah.
versus mom bloggers or marathoners or wellness experts or any number of people that have specialty and influence in their niche, but politics would be wildly off brand for them, and number two, it would probably hurt them from making money with their traditional client
Yeah, I
base.
think that's the biggest issue is it preventing them from making money moving forward. Because I mean, call her daddy is not you wouldn't necessarily call that political. I mean, of course, she
Yeah.
wasn't getting paid for it, but you wouldn't call it political. But I mean, Alex Cooper made the distinction at the beginning that she was really going to stay with this focus on women's issues because otherwise it did not feel relevant for her brand and for
Okay.
her audience. And so I don't know. I think there's something special about lifestyle influencers being able to pull something in and show how it does impact beyond that. I mean, it would be weird if it were like, I'm trying to think of something like completely like a skateboarding influencer who only ever talked about skateboarding and nothing else
Right. And
ever.
then right. And I don't think that when I researched that position, I don't think the campaign was planning on paying anybody. So to me, again, if you're working with influencers and you're not paying them and you're going to ask them to create content that's going to harm their chances of monetization going forward, it seems like just from a best practices standpoint, how I would advise them would be like, let's rethink that a little bit. You're
Yeah.
going to maybe burn more bridges than you want to. So,
So this gets to, we were talking, I think we probably only have time for one more. I have such like a huge giant list of things to talk to you about, so we'll have lots for next week.
yeah.
But that kind of leads into, we were talking about clients who have this big talk of wanting influencers to be themselves and do their
Yeah.
thing and be organic to what their brand is, except.
Asterisk. Yeah. Yes. So, where do you think that starts? Because you said the word client, and I'm thinking on LinkedIn, I'm seeing our people, agency side or consultant side, expert side touting this. You've got to let influencers be who they are and let their stars shine. And then you have clients, brands who are like, hold on, how do we do that and still get the key
Yeah,
messaging, the e- even the timeline, like getting them to publish on certain days is restrictive instead of just when you feel like it or when. Now
right.
obviously we want to let influencers say, hey, Tuesdays and Fridays are my best day, I already know that, that's great. But there's a lot of lip service being given right now to let influencers loose, and there's a lot of room between that advice and reality,
Right.
and what can really go wrong in between, or what brand clients often have the appetite or tolerance for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become aspirational. Like it's aspirational to let this creator do his or her thing and let their freak flag fly and just do all of
Yeah.
it. But at the end of the day, you have a brand manager who needs to make sure that the label is showing properly and that the
Yes.
influencer is not wearing the logo of another brand on their shirt and
Yes.
that, the language is appropriate and that, the we had, that the product name is being pronounced correctly, that, there are
Hmm.
so many. I think it's just the aspiration kind of like hitting up against the reality of them doing their job properly. And it's going to always be, I think my frustration comes from when I do see people on LinkedIn talking about like, just let them do their thing. Like, it just doesn't feel like, sure, yeah, great. Okay. That sounds
Right.
terrific. But now let's like get out of La La Land and
Yes.
and find a world in which, we can all be comfortable.
And it might make your job and my job a little bit harder if brand clients see that, well, we should be able to just let the influencers loose. Okay, let's try it once. And then you'll fire us because you'll be like, what just happened with these influencers and who let them run amok with the messaging or not even touch on the messaging, or
Right.
the messaging was like the last 30 seconds of a 5-minute video or something. Like, what is that? Like, we serve many masters when we're
Yeah.
putting these things together. And our job, and I know you're skilled at it, and we've dedicated time to figuring this out. Where's the balance
Mm-hmm.
of, yes, I would argue that a really strong brief, and I don't mean detailed and extensive, but just clearly articulated vision with the tools that the influencers need can be a springboard then to their creativity. And we found over the years that influencers don't want carte blanche. Now, creators and influencers, two different things.
Yeah.
So again, pin that for another conversation. But our influencers that we've worked with appreciate guardrails. They
For sure.
appreciate, structure and having some oversight and management to the process, while also respecting that they are experts at what they do. They know how to work the social media landscape and algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. They're mini creative agencies. So we do want to encourage that. And then PS, Danielle, I know we've all had, the content comes back, we've managed it or not because the client didn't want it. And then they are like, oh, that was really stilted, or that was really this, or like there's always,
Yeah.
a perfect world does not exist in this
I mean,
regard.
that is an issue in every part of life, right? It's you don't know what you don't want until you see it.
Right. Right. And our
Right.
time is spent off on saying, no, you don't want that.
Yeah.
I guarantee you don't want, okay, we'll try it, but you don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't believe we were like worried. We made a list of like 15 things we can talk about in case we couldn't fit the half hour, but we managed to do it.
We nailed it. Yes.
We will be back next week, and we have our big list of things to talk about, and I'm sure stuff will come up in the news. But just to tease out, one of the things that we are going to tackle next week is, well, what should we do? Because there's one that I really want to talk about that we didn't make it to
Talent
today.
managers.
I think we should do that next week instead of okay. So next week we're going to talk about talent managers, because there's been a lot of controversy about the pros and cons of talent management in the influencer space. A lot of controversy about it on LinkedIn that Casey and I have been kind of diving into a bit, but we thought we have some more freedom to let loose in this format. Yeah.
Yes. I can't wait.
Okay. Well,
and I think we should brand it Danielle's Big List.
My big list.
You've got a big list.
I like lists. Yeah, we talked about this.
I like big lists, and I cannot lie.
Yep. True story. Okay. Well, we will see everyone next week. Thanks for tuning in to episode 1.
This is great. See you soon.